For centuries, ancient Greek philosophers gazed at the stars, seeking the hidden order of the natural universe. However, in Athens, there was one philosopher who turned the philosophical gaze away from the vast cosmos and toward the mind and soul. He was Socrates. If you encountered him on the streets of 5th century BC Athens, you would never suspect that he was one of the greatest figures in the history of Western philosophy. Yet, he lived an austere life that ordinary people would find unbearable, possessing robust mental fortitude and self-control. While serving in the military during freezing winters, he walked barefoot on the ice, marching more steadily than soldiers wearing shoes. He also had a peculiar trait, becoming entirely absorbed in his thoughts. Once, in order to think through a problem, he stood motionless in the exact same spot for a day and a night. He wrote no books and delivered no speeches like the elite. Likening himself to a gadfly, he relentlessly questioned the self-proclaimed wise men on the streets day after day, asking them, what is justice? What is courage? What is virtue? He never directly spoon-fed ready-made answers to his interlocutors. Instead, he employed a dialectical technique of step-by-step inquiry known as the elencus. And, for instance, when exploring the concept of piety, someone confidently asserted that piety is doing what the gods love. Socrates did not refute this question, but initiated a series of probing questions. He first asked whether the gods also quarrel and fight among themselves due to differing views on right and wrong, good and evil. The respondent admitted that this was true. Socrates then pressed further. Since the gods quarrel, is it possible that the same action could please one god while angering another? The respondent could only nod at this. Socrates subsequently drew the logical conclusion. If this is the case, wouldn't this same action be simultaneously pious and impious? Through this method of continuous cross-examination, he astutely exposed the underlying contradictions in the respondent's viewpoint, forcing those trapped in blind confidence to acknowledge their own ignorance. Ultimately, however, this great mentor was sentenced to death by the Athenian democratic court on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth. On the eve of his execution, his old friend Crito sneaked into the prison, having arranged an escape plan and attempting to use a large sum of money to secure his release. Socrates could have regained his freedom, but yet he refused. He told his friend that one must never return evil for evil. If he were to flee, he would be trampling upon and destroying the city's laws that had nurtured and protected him. More importantly, he faced death with profound composure. He smiled and told his friends that a divine sign or an inner voice has always guided him. Whenever he was about to do something wrong, this voice would intervene to stop him. But today, as he faced execution, the voice remained unusually silent. To him, this meant that the divine did not oppose him, and the death he was about to face was not a bad thing. To the Athenians of that era, the voice of God Socrates spoke of sounded tantamount to heresy. Ancient Greek religion revered the gods of Mount Olympus who possessed human passions and desires, experiencing jealousy, deceiving one another, and vying for power. For the Greeks of that time, religious belief primarily manifested as a transactional and utilitarian ritual of sacrifice. People offered sacrifices to the gods in exchange for material protection and success in real life. What, then, did the voice of God in Socrates' ear truly signify? In reality, this so-called divine sign was a profound metaphor. It truly marked the awakening of the human moral conscience. It signified a monumental ideological revolution, shifting religious belief from an exchange of interests to an internal ethical foundation. It meant that the standard for judging the righteousness of an action was no longer the mood of divine deities, nor the blind options of the secular masses, but the firm, unshakable reason and conscience within the individual. By using this inner voice, Socrates refuted the idea of primitive mythological thinking, marking the point where humanity began to use independent, examined reason to measure the value of life. Socrates was one of the greatest philosophers of his time, questioning everything that people thought they knew. He pioneered the idea of a human subconscious guiding him through every decision he made, rather than supporting the idea that the actions were made to please gods. Ultimately, he single-handedly challenged the philosophical order of the time, cementing him in history as one of the greatest minds to exist.